We're into the deepest recesses of hell.
We're into the deepest recesses of hell. That's not a movie line. That's not a character speaking. That is Jim Caviezel, one of the most recognizable actors on the planet, breaking down in real time, describing what he says is actually happening to children right now. And the moment he said it out loud,
it's an 8-armed octopus. And if you take just trafficking out, that arm will grow back. You have to take the head.
They came for him. His career, his reputation, his allies, all of it, targeted.
When the public wakes up to this whole thing and sees films like this, people won't be able to walk down the street ever again.
He told us this was coming before any of it was mainstream. He got buried for it. And now the Epstein files are open. The names are confirmed, and Jim Caviezel is still standing, but barely, because the forces that want him gone, they are not done. Let's start with who Jim Caviezel actually is, because that context changes everything about what's happening to him right now. Most people first saw him as Jesus Christ in The Passion of the Christ, one of the highest grossing independent films in the history of cinema. That role alone should have guaranteed him decades of work, top-tier projects, and an ironclad place in Hollywood's inner circle. He didn't take it. Instead of cashing in on that cultural moment, Caviezel made a choice that virtually no one in his position would have made. He attached himself to a small, underfunded film about child trafficking. A film that major studios didn't want to touch. A film that nobody in Hollywood wanted to greenlight, distribute, or even acknowledge. Sound of Freedom. Directed by Alejandro Monteverde, the film told the true story of Tim Ballard, a real government agent who walked away from a career at the Department of Homeland Security to personally rescue children being trafficked across Latin America. It wasn't a polished action thriller. It wasn't sanitized for comfortable viewing. It showed the actual mechanics, how children are taken, how the operations work, and what happens to those kids once they disappear into these networks.
We were about 4 years ago, we showed the movie, and this has been a 5-year deal. And they've done everything they could to stop it, as they did this with The Passion of the Christ.
4.5 years of fighting just to get this film seen. And here is where the story starts to crack open. Because the film Sound of Freedom was produced on a budget of just $14.5 million. Modest, practically invisible by Hollywood standards. And when it was finally released, the industry didn't just ignore it, they actively worked to bury it. Caviezel himself has stated publicly that every major studio, every major network was not asked, told, to stay away from the film, and most of them obeyed. Think about that for a second. You have a movie about rescuing children from trafficking networks, and the most powerful institutions in entertainment collectively decided it should not be seen. That alone should make you ask questions. But instead of disappearing quietly, Sound of Freedom did something nobody predicted. It grossed $251 million at the box office. It outperformed Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning. It beat Indiana Jones. Both of those films came with $100 million budgets and massive marketing campaigns. Sound of Freedom had almost none of that, and it still won.
So if you go to the devil to play the devil will deceive you and put something up there that deceives the public.
The establishment's plan to keep this film quiet failed completely. And that failure had consequences, not for the studios, for Caviezel. Here's the thing about Sound of Freedom's press tour. Most actors, when they promote a film, stay inside the lane. They talk about their preparation for the role. They thank the director, they do the morning shows, they keep it safe. Jim Caviezel did not do any of that. Instead, he used every platform he was given. Steve Bannon's War Room, Jordan Peterson's podcast, the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and started laying out information that most people in Hollywood would never go near. He wasn't just promoting a film, he was connecting dots publicly, out loud, on record. He described a global trafficking industry worth an estimated $150 billion annually. He argued the number of children currently trapped in these systems exceeds the total number of people enslaved during the entire 350-year period of the transatlantic slave trade.
Are we going to let our children go? And that's a question, and people have to answer. And I think they're onto this. And the way things are going to be done now, it's going to be changed from this point on. There's going to be a new direction in this country.
But the single moment that permanently marked him was when he went further than the trafficking economics. He began describing what he called the empire. He argued that the trafficking networks aren't simply about labor exploitation or money. He said they are deeply intertwined with something darker, the deliberate extraction of biological substances from children. Substances, he claimed, that are coveted and consumed by powerful people at the very top.
The adrenaline of children, look, where we're at right now. Hopefully, we need your prayers. Essentially, you have adrenaline in your body. I'll just simplify it. And when you are scared, you produce it. If a child knows he's going to his body will secrete this.
Now, the moment that clip aired publicly, the moment those words entered the mainstream conversation, something shifted. This was no longer just about a movie. This was no longer about raising awareness. In the eyes of the institutions he was describing, Jim Caviezel had become a threat, and threats get neutralized. The intelligence and media apparatus, as Caviezel himself has described it, operates with a very specific playbook when someone with a major platform starts exposing too much. It doesn't argue with facts. It doesn't debate. It doesn't engage on the merits. It erases. The first target wasn't actually Caviezel himself. It was the man standing directly beside him, Tim Ballard. Tim Ballard was the real-life inspiration for Sound of Freedom, a former DHS agent, the founder of Operation Underground Railroad, an organization built entirely around rescuing children from trafficking networks. He wasn't a Hollywood figure, he wasn't a theorist, he was someone who had been inside these operations, someone who understood exactly how these systems functioned on the ground. That made him extraordinarily dangerous, because Caviezel had the platform and the public attention, but Ballard had the knowledge. Together, they were a dual threat, a storyteller and an operator pointing at the same system simultaneously. And in July 2023, at the exact peak of Sound of Freedom's box office dominance, Tim Ballard was removed as CEO of the organization he founded. Think carefully about that timing. The movie is breaking records. The public conversation about trafficking is louder than it has been in years. Donations and volunteer interest in Operation Underground Railroad are surging. And suddenly, in that specific window, the man who built the organization gets thrown out of it. The mechanism they used was a wave of misconduct accusations filed by multiple employees, almost simultaneously. An independent law firm was rapidly deployed to investigate, and that firm reached its conclusions with remarkable speed that Ballard had engaged in unprofessional behavior that violated organizational policies.
I would not throw myself in the way of the enemy that's going to hurt or maim my children, and my own 3 children, that I love my life so much.
This is the operational signature Caviezel has been describing. When someone threatens the system doesn't attack them directly. It manufactures a reason for the public to look away. It generates enough noise and scandal to give the media retroactive justification for dismissing everything that person ever said.
I am going to grant the motion by the moving defendants, OUR, the Spear Fund, and Ms. Russin, and dismiss count 15 as to those defendants with prejudice.
But here's what the mainstream coverage never properly followed up on. In November 2025, prosecutors in Salt Lake City quietly declined to file any charges against Tim Ballard. No charges, no trial. Insufficient evidence, they said. After everything, the headlines, the investigations, the organizational collapse, they walked away from it. They didn't hold a press conference about that. There was no segment on the evening news saying they got it wrong. There was just silence, because the silence came after the window of maximum damage had already closed. The goal was never a courtroom conviction. The goal was to destroy Ballard's credibility at the exact moment it mattered most, and then quietly disappear before anyone noticed the accusation had fallen apart. With Ballard gone, the pressure machine shifted its attention to the director, Alejandro Monteverde. Suddenly, Alejandro found himself in the center of a media storm he clearly never anticipated. Interviews began surfacing across major outlets, and the questions weren't about filmmaking. They weren't about the story behind the movie. They were about the chaos forming around it. The conspiracy allegations, the online movements, Caviezel's statements. The implicit message was clear. Pick a side.
Yeah. You know, it is such a sensitive subject matter that it's very important that the film or this dialogue doesn't get labeled politically. This is a film that should unite. You know, we're so divided as a country that, for me, I'm always looking to finding stories that unite us. You know, this is not something that we should disagree with.
Alejandro began drawing a very deliberate line between himself and Caviezel's public statements. He made clear that the film had been written back in 2015, 2 years before any of the online movements Caviezel was being associated with. He emphasized that the movie was never intended to be political, that it was simply meant to raise awareness.
After the film has been released and has found success, along with some of the conspiracy theories that have floated around and the controversies, do you still believe that Jim Caviezel was the right man for the role?
Absolutely, and let me tell you why.
Carefully, he distanced himself from the narrative, but diplomatically, because Alejandro understood something very clearly. In Hollywood, your career lives and dies on your relationships, and when those relationships become fragile, survival instinct kicks in. He even admitted publicly that when the controversy controversy exploded, his first reaction was not to fight back. It was not to defend the film or argue the facts. It was to run. He said his instinct was simply to hide. That's not cowardice. That's someone who understood exactly how much power was pointed in his direction, and who knew that he wasn't the real target anyway. Jim Caviezel was. Now here is where everything Caviezel has been saying starts connecting to something the entire world has now seen with its own eyes. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. His story officially ended in a New York jail cell in 2019, under circumstances that, even now, most people do not fully believe were accidental. His cellmate was transferred the night before. The security cameras outside his cell malfunctioned at the same time, and the man who allegedly knew the most compromising information about the most powerful people on Earth died before he ever saw a real trial. But his network didn't die with him, and the files didn't disappear. In December 2025, the Department of Justice released documents under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Then in January 2026, a second wave hit, over 3 million pages. Flight logs, emails, photos from the private island, FBI investigation documents, 95,000 photographs from Epstein's estate alone.
Photos of several high-profile men, including former President Bill Clinton and pop icon Michael Jackson, have been made public as part of the massive trove of Jeffrey Epstein-related documents released by the Department of Justice.
And the audience watching Caviezel's old interviews suddenly started thinking the same thing. He told us this was coming.
And they all cried out Epstein Island. And I went, oh, okay. Now I understand what we're up against.
He knew. In a movie theater in Las Vegas, watching audiences react to a scene in Sound of Freedom, Caviezel heard hundreds of people simultaneously connect the dots to Epstein's island. And instead of distancing himself from that reaction, he leaned into it because he believed they were right to make that connection. And now the files confirm there was far more happening on that island than most people were ever supposed to know. Let's talk about what the files actually revealed, because this is no longer theory. These are documents released by the United States Department of Justice. Bill Gates, who first met Epstein in 1992 and maintained a documented relationship with him for years, admitted in February 2026 to 2 affairs and confirmed that Epstein had attempted to blackmail him over one of them.
Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates has admitted to having 2 affairs with Russian women and has apologized for his links to the convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein.
Gates' own words, it was foolish. It was a mistake. Prince Andrew appears in Epstein's private emails several hundred times. There is a 2011 email sent the day after a photograph of Andrew with the then teenage Virginia Giuffre was first published, in which Andrew writes to Epstein directly.
Andrew writes, "I'm just as concerned for you, don't worry about me. It would seem we are in this together and will have to rise above it."
We are in it together. That same Andrew had previously told the BBC on camera that he had cut off all contact with Epstein after their relationship became inappropriate.
I said, look, because of what has happened, I don't think it is appropriate that we should remain in contact. And by mutual agreement during that walk in the park, we decided that we would part company, and I left, I think it was the next day. And to this day, I never had any contact with him from that day.
The emails say otherwise. Bill Clinton. The December 2025 release included photos of Clinton at Epstein properties, in a hot tub with Ghislaine Maxwell, on what appears to be Epstein's private plane alongside Michael Jackson and Diana Ross. Clinton flew on Epstein's private jet multiple times, and in January 2026, when the House opened a formal investigation into Epstein, both Bill and Hillary Clinton refused to testify.
I don't remember anything about it.
During hours of closed-door congressional questioning, former President Bill Clinton repeatedly gave similar answers about some of his encounters with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, first reported by CNN.
I have no recollection of it, but it could have happened.
He doesn't remember. And then there's Howard Lutnick, currently the United States Secretary of Commerce, who publicly described Epstein as gross and stated clearly that he had cut ties with him decades ago.
And he says, and the right kind of massage.
His wife, his children, by yacht to the island. He now sits in the United States cabinets. And this is exactly what Caviezel has been screaming about. Not just that these networks exist, but that the people inside them move into positions of institutional power. They don't disappear, they ascend. And from those positions, they have the ability to control what gets investigated, what gets buried, and who gets destroyed for speaking up. Now let's be very clear about what has happened to Jim Caviezel's career since Sound of Freedom. Before the film, Caviezel was a working actor with a credible body of work. The Passion of the Christ, The Count of Monte Cristo, the long-running series Person of Interest. He was someone Hollywood studios could work with, someone the industry tolerated. After the film, and more specifically, after the press tour, that changed.
I'd like to work again, but I've never been a guy who would sell his soul to get, money or fame. was never my goal.
Read that carefully. I'd like to work again. Past tense desire, present tense reality. He is not working at the level he should be working at. For an actor of his profile, his output since Sound of Freedom has been conspicuously quiet. That's not an accident. When you openly accuse a $150 billion global industry of being sustained by elite demand, when you name the mechanisms by which powerful institutions protect themselves, when you stand on national platforms and describe a system that implicates people with direct access to Hollywood financing, studios stop calling. Not because they disagree with you necessarily, but because the people who control the money make it known that your name is radioactive. And in an industry built on access and relationships, radioactive means unemployable. He is described feeling hunted, and not metaphorically. The specific forces he's describing, intelligence apparatus, media infrastructure, institutional legal mechanisms, these aren't abstract. These are the same forces that were deployed against Tim Ballard. The same pattern, the same playbook. First, you isolate the target from institutional support. You make sure no studio, no network, no mainstream platform will touch them. Then you wait, because without income, without projects, without visibility, a public figure starts to fade, and eventually people stop listening. That's the plan. But Caviezel hasn't faded, and that appears to be making certain people very uncomfortable. On April 26th, Jim Caviezel did something that very few Hollywood figures have ever done. He went to Congress and gave formal testimony, not as an actor promoting a project, as someone bearing witness. And the number he put on the record was staggering.
I did a movie a long time ago in New York, and I was with Homicide, and I got to see the contortion of a face when someone, and it's hard to watch. But when you start going into this, which is children, there is something that I can't even fathom. I had no choice but to go in, and I hear the screams in my heart.
850,000. That's the number of children he testified are currently missing. Not globally in some abstract sense, missing. In a country with the most sophisticated law enforcement infrastructure on Earth. His question to Congress, and it's a question that still doesn't have a satisfying answer, it was simple. How do the three-letter agencies not know about this? How does a network operating at the scale he's describing, $150 billion annually, millions of children, documented connections to the highest levels of political and financial power, how does that operate without the intelligence community knowing? And his answer, the one he keeps returning to, is that they do know. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's a feature of it.
Well, I'm not the bad guy. I'm the good guy. I am the warden. They are my prisoners.
He's not backing down. Even now, with his career under scrutiny, with his allies targeted and dismantled one by one, with the full weight of institutional power pointed in his direction, he's still standing there saying the same things. Because here's what Caviezel understands that most people don't want to sit with. The Epstein files are real. The names are real. The island was real. The flights were real. And the children on those flights, they were real too. And someone has to say it. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at the full picture of what Jim Caviezel has sacrificed. He had a career that most actors dream about, a role that cemented him in cultural history. A platform that could have been used for any number of comfortable, profitable things. He could have done franchise films. He could have taken the streaming deals. He could have stayed quiet about everything he knew and lived very well. He didn't.
I will tell you this right now. I would absolutely, if this were to change the world.
He couldn't finish the sentence in that interview, which might be the most telling moment in any of his public appearances, because it suggests something beyond professional calculation. This is personal for him. These aren't abstract statistics. These are children. And he is a man who believes deeply, structurally, at the core of his identity, that silence in the face of this is its own form of participation, and the machine has responded accordingly. His name is now attached to controversy in every industry database that casting directors and producers consult before making decisions. His association with Sound of Freedom, a film that generated $251 million, doesn't translate into opportunity. It translates into a warning flag. He has been professionally isolated. His closest operational ally, Tim Ballard, was destroyed by a coordinated misconduct campaign that later collapsed completely, but not before it did its intended damage. The director of the film he made publicly distanced himself from Caviezel's statements to protect his own career, and the media apparatus that should have been amplifying the questions he raised instead spent its energy discrediting him.
And it's disgusting that the media hasn't covered it like they should.
The disgust in his voice when he says that is not performative. It is the sound of someone who understands that the media's silence isn't negligence, it's a choice. Here's where we are right now. The Epstein files are public. 3 million pages, 95,000 photographs, flight logs with names, emails with names, photos that put powerful people in places they swore they'd never been. Jim Caviezel told us this system existed before those files were ever released. He described it in detail. He named the mechanisms, he laid out the economics, he warned that the people running it had access to unlimited capital, institutional protection, and the ability to destroy anyone who threatened their cover. And then they tried to destroy him. His career went quiet. His closest ally was dismantled in real time. The director of his film ran for cover. And the mainstream media, with a few exceptions, mostly looked the other way and called it all conspiracy theory. But here's the thing about conspiracy theories. Sometimes the files come out, sometimes the documents are declassified, sometimes the names end up in court records and congressional hearings, and Department of Justice releases that 300 million people can read. And when that happens, the people who were called crazy for saying it first don't look so crazy anymore.
And so America right now and the world, when they see this, they're being reawakened because the media has lied too many times. And this is the strand that broke the camel's back.
What comes next? That's the only question left for the people in those files, for the institutions that protected them, and for Jim Caviezel, a man who gave up everything to stand in front of a camera and say what most people in his position would never dare say. They came for him, they're still coming for him, and he hasn't moved an inch. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Caviezel's professional destruction was coordinated? And do you believe the names in the Epstein files will ever truly face accountability? Or does power simply protect itself forever? Subscribe if you're new. You already know what this channel is about.